the Himalayas are known as the highest mountain range on Earth. But what if the real story isn't the height at all? Because without understanding what truly shapes this place, the most extraordinary locations across the range lose the meaning that makes them unforgettable. So, before we travel to the most remarkable wonders of the Himalayas, we'll begin with several fascinating facts. Details that reveal how this mountain system works, why it looks the way it does, and what makes it unlike any other landscape on the planet. And once you understand these facts, the places we visit later, especially the final three, will look completely different. The Himalayas cover an area so vast that most people never register their true scale. The range stretches across more than 2,400 kilometers. Roughly 1,500 miles, spanning 5 countries from Pakistan in the west to Bhutan in the east. It contains more than 100 mountains exceeding 7,200 meters, nearly 23,600 feet. And it holds the largest concentration of glaciers outside the polar regions. Storing so much fresh water that it supplies the major river systems of Asia. Including the Ganges, the Indus, the Brahmaputra, the Yangtze, and the Mekong. Together, these rivers provide drinking water, agricultural water, and hydroelectric power to more than 2 billion people. Nearly a quarter of the entire human population depends on water that originates in Himalayan ice and snow. But what makes this range truly extraordinary isn't just how high it reaches or how much water it holds. It's how it came to exist at all. And the deeper you look, the more the Himalayas behave less like a mountain range and more like a collision that is still happening in slow motion. One of the most surprising forces shaping the Himalayas begins not in the mountains themselves, but in the ocean floor 60 million years ago. The Indian subcontinent, which was once a separate landmass drifting northward across an ancient ocean called the Tethys Sea, collided with the Eurasian plate in a geological impact so slow it took tens of millions of years to complete. The ocean floor between the two plates was pushed downward and the land above it was forced upward, folding and thickening into what became the highest mountain range on Earth. That collision has not stopped. India is still moving northward at roughly 5 centimeters per year, about 2 inches. And the Himalayas are still rising at approximately 5 millimeters per year. Even as erosion works to wear them back down, the mountains are not a finished product. They are an ongoing event. Another factor shaping the Himalayas is the monsoon system, which works very differently than most people expect. The Himalayas do not simply receive the monsoon, they create it. During summer, the Indian Ocean sends massive volumes of warm, moist air northward across the subcontinent. When this air mass meets the wall of the Himalayas, it has nowhere to go but up. As it rises and cools, it releases its moisture as rain and snow on the southern slopes, delivering some of the heaviest rainfall recorded anywhere on Earth. The town of Mawzinram in the Indian state of Meghalaya, just south of the Himalayan foothills, receives an average of nearly 12,000 millimeters of rain per year. Roughly 470 inches, making it the wettest inhabited place on Earth. On the northern side of the range, the monsoon air has lost most of its moisture, creating the cold, dry conditions of the Tibetan Plateau. The same mountain range that drowns its southern slopes in rain keeps its northern face in near-permanent drought. This single geographical feature shapes the agriculture, the culture, the religion, and the daily life of hundreds of millions of people across an entire continent. The structure of Himalayan ecosystems reveals another unexpected pattern. The Himalayas are not one environment, but a vertical stack of completely different worlds. At the base of the range, subtropical forests support tigers, rhinoceroses, and elephants in environments that receive intense heat and monsoon rainfall. A few hundred meters higher, temperate broadleaf forests appear, filled with rhododendrons, oak, and maple. Higher still, conifer forests of fir and pine give way to alpine meadows where snow leopards hunt blue sheep across open slopes. Above the meadows, the vegetation thins to mosses and lichens clinging to rock faces. And above that, nothing grows at all. The permanent snow and ice begins, and life reduces itself to the microorganisms that survive in glacial meltwater. This entire sequence, from subtropical jungle to permanent ice, is compressed into a vertical distance of roughly 5,000 meters. Less than 3.5 miles of altitude. A journey that would take weeks to complete across the horizontal landscape of a continent can be walked in a single day by moving uphill. Speaking of what lives here, Himalayan biodiversity is one of the most important and least discussed facts about the range. The eastern Himalayas in particular, spanning parts of Nepal, Bhutan, and the Indian state of Sikkim, are considered one of the world's biodiversity hotspots. More than 10,000 plant species have been recorded in the region. It supports over 900 bird species, including some that breed nowhere else on Earth. The snow leopard, one of the most elusive large predators on the planet, exists in a population estimated at between 4,000 and 6,000 individuals spread across the entire range. Making a sighting not simply a wildlife encounter, but a statistically improbable event that researchers spend months in the field trying to achieve. Another layer of the Himalayan story lies in its human cultures, which are as diverse as its ecosystems and as shaped by altitude as its wildlife. The people who have lived in the highest permanently inhabited places on Earth for centuries belong to ethnic groups. Including the Sherpa of Nepal, the Tibetan communities of the High Plateau, and the Ladakhi people of northern India, who have developed physiological adaptations to altitude that researchers are still documenting. Sherpa people carry a genetic variant that allows their bodies to use oxygen more efficiently at high altitude than most human populations. Their mitochondria produce energy through slightly different metabolic pathways. They can perform physical work at altitudes where most people from lower elevations become incapacitated. This is not training, it is evolution shaped by thousands of years of living at the top of the world. One final detail reveals just how dynamic this environment truly is. The Himalayas are melting. Glaciers across the range are retreating at rates that have accelerated significantly in recent decades. The Gangotri Glacier in India, the source of the Ganges River, has retreated more than 2 kilometers since 1780. And is currently losing ground at an increasing rate. Studies project that 2/3 of Himalayan glaciers could be significantly reduced by 2100 if current warming trends continue. For the 2 billion people downstream who depend on glacial meltwater to supplement river flow during dry seasons, this is not a distant environmental concern. It is a direct threat to agriculture, drinking water, and the stability of some of the most densely populated regions on Earth. Understanding these forces, the collision still happening beneath the surface, the monsoon created and controlled by the mountains, the vertical stack of ecosystems compressed into a few miles of altitude. The biodiversity shaped by isolation and extremity. The human cultures evolved for the highest places on Earth. And the glaciers retreating faster than at any point in recorded history reshapes how we see the Himalayas. And as we move into the most remarkable places across this range, these insights will help each location reveal its deeper story. The Terai lowlands form the base of the Himalayan system in Nepal and northern India. A flat subtropical belt where the mountains meet the plains, and they contain an environment that most people never associate with the Himalayas at all. Chitwan National Park in southern Nepal sits entirely within the Terai. At an elevation of only around 150 meters, roughly 500 feet. And it shelters one of the last significant populations of one-horned rhinoceroses in the world. The rhinoceroses of Chitwan nearly disappeared entirely in the 1960s when the forest was cleared for agriculture. And hunting reduced the population to fewer than 100 individuals. Conservation efforts over the following decades brought the population back to more than 700 animals. The recovery is one of the most successful large mammal conservation stories in Asia. The Terai forests are shaped by the Himalayan rivers that cross them, flooding seasonally and depositing the sediment that builds the riverbanks and islands where rhinoceroses graze and gharial crocodiles bask. The Bengal tiger also hunts here in densities that make Chitwan one of the most reliable places in Asia to observe this animal in the wild. But the Terai is a transition zone, and as the ground begins to rise and the subtropical forest gives way to the first foothills, the character of the landscape shifts entirely, leading toward valleys that have been centers of civilization for more than 2,000 years. The Kathmandu Valley sits at an elevation of around 1,300 meters, roughly 4,200 feet. In a bowl surrounded by the first ridges of the Himalayan foothills. It was once a lake, drained according to legend by the Bodhisattva Manjushri, who cut a gorge through the southern rim with his sword to let the water out. The geological explanation is nearly as dramatic. The valley floor is composed of the sediments of an ancient lake that existed here several 100,000 years ago. And the river that drains it today cuts through those sediments at the southern end in a gorge that geologists confirm was opened by a combination of tectonic uplift and erosion. The legend and the geology agree on the basic structure of events, differing only in the agent responsible. The valley contains more UNESCO World Heritage Sites per square kilometer than almost anywhere else on Earth. The Pashupatinath temple on the banks of the Bagmati River has been a center of Hindu worship for at least 2,000 years. Its ghats, the stone steps leading down to the river, are used for cremation ceremonies that have been conducted here continuously for longer than most religious sites in the world have existed. The Buddhanath Stupa is one of the largest Buddhist stupas in the world, its white dome and painted eyes visible from a considerable distance across the valley. Tibetan Buddhist communities have gathered around it for centuries. And the streets surrounding it are lined with prayer wheels, incense smoke, and the sound of monks chanting inside monastery walls. And as the valley opens northward and the first high peaks appear above the foothills, the landscape begins the transition from civilizational center to the wilderness that defines the range. The Annapurna Massif in central Nepal is not a single mountain, but a connected group of peaks that together form one of the most spectacular high-altitude landscapes accessible to trekkers anywhere in the world. The highest point, Annapurna 1, reaches 8,091 meters, 26,545 feet. Making it the 10th highest mountain on Earth and statistically one of the most dangerous. Its fatality rate among climbing attempts has historically been higher than Everest, a fact that its visual beauty from a distance does nothing to communicate. The Annapurna Circuit, a trekking route that circumnavigates the entire massif, crosses the Thorong La Pass at 5,416 meters, 17,769 feet. One of the highest mountain passes regularly crossed on foot anywhere on Earth. The route passes through a complete sequence of Himalayan climate zones in a single journey. From subtropical rice paddies and banana plants at the base through temperate oak and rhododendron forest. Through alpine scrub and high meadows, over the pass where the wind moves with a particular force of air that has been accelerating across the Tibetan plateau for thousands of kilometers. And then down the other side into the dramatically drier landscape of the Mustang Valley, where the monsoon shadow of the Annapurna Range creates a high-altitude desert that looks and feels more like Tibet than Nepal. The Mustang Valley was a restricted area closed to foreign visitors until 1992. And parts of it remain subject to entry permits today. The landscape it protects is extraordinary. Eroded cliffs in shades of red, orange, and white rise above a valley floor, carved by the Kali Gandaki River, which occupies what may be the deepest gorge on Earth. when measured from the summits of Annapurna and Dhaulagiri on either side to the river below. Ancient cave complexes carved into the cliff faces contain Buddhist paintings, manuscripts, and human remains dating back more than 1,000 years. Some of the caves are accessible only by ladder or rope and appear to have served as dwellings, religious spaces, and burial sites simultaneously. Who carved them and how they were reached without modern climbing equipment remains an open question. And as the Kali Gandaki bends southward and the valley walls close in, the route leads eastward toward the mountain that defines the entire range in the world's imagination. The Khumbu region of northeastern Nepal is the approach corridor to Mount Everest. And it contains within it one of the most complete expressions of the relationship between altitude, culture, and landscape available anywhere in the Himalayas. The Sherpa communities of Khumbu have lived at elevations between 3,000 and 5,000 meters for generations. Building villages, monasteries, and trade networks in conditions that would make permanent habitation impossible for most human populations. Namche Bazaar, the principal trading town of the Khumbu, sits at 3,440 meters, 11,286 feet. In an amphitheater of rock above the confluence of two glacial rivers. It has been a market center since at least the 18th century, when it served as a trading post between Tibet and the lower valleys of Nepal. Today it functions as the primary supply and acclimatization stop for the hundreds of expeditions that pass through annually on their way to Everest and the surrounding peaks. The town has electricity, internet connections, espresso machines, and gear shops selling equipment manufactured on the other side of the planet. It also has monasteries whose prayer flags have been renewed every year by the same families for generations. And elderly residents who remember when the first foreign climbers arrived in the valley and asked about the mountain that local people called Chomolungma, Mother Goddess of the World. Everest Base Camp on the southern Nepalese side sits at 5,364 meters, 17,598 feet. In the Khumbu Glacier, a river of ice that flows from the western CWM, a high enclosed valley between the upper slopes of Everest, Lhotse, and Nuptse. The glacier is visually striking in a way that photographs do not accurately convey. Its surface is covered in a chaotic landscape of ice towers called siraks, some standing 10 meters high. And rock debris carried down from the surrounding peaks over thousands of years of slow movement. The glacier moves at a rate of roughly 1 meter per day, meaning that a fixed camp on its surface will be in a different position a week later than it was when the tent was pitched. The Khumbu Icefall, the section of glacier between base camp and the western CWM, is widely considered the most dangerous part of the standard Everest climbing route. The glacier here drops steeply and moves faster than in the more level sections above and below. Causing constant movement, collapse, and reformation of the ice towers and crevasses that climbers must cross on aluminum ladders. The icefall is different every season, and in some years significantly different week to week. Climbing it requires accepting a level of objective hazard, danger that exists regardless of skill or preparation, that distinguishes Himalayan mountaineering from almost every other form of human endeavor. The Bhutan Himalayas on the eastern end of the range represent a dimension of the mountains that the more heavily visited regions of Nepal cannot offer. Bhutan has deliberately managed its tourism through a policy of limiting visitor numbers. And requiring all tourists to book through licensed operators and pay a daily fee that funds conservation and cultural preservation programs. The result is a Himalayan country that has maintained more than 70% forest cover. Protected its wildlife populations more effectively than most neighboring countries. And preserved a Buddhist cultural tradition that in other parts of the Himalayas has been significantly disrupted by rapid development and mass tourism. The Paro Valley in western Bhutan contains Taksang Monastery, known internationally as the Tiger's Nest. A cluster of temple buildings constructed directly onto a cliff face at 900 meters above the valley floor. The monastery was built in the 17th century at a site where the Buddhist master Padmasambhava is said to have meditated in the 8th century. Arriving at the location on the back of a tigress, the physical fact of the buildings on the cliff, cantilevered over a vertical drop with nothing below them but open air for hundreds of meters, is sufficient to produce a sustained state of disbelief in most visitors who see it for the first time. The construction required materials to be carried by hand-up trails that are challenging even without loads. How the builders manage the cliff sections without modern equipment is a question the monastery itself does not attempt to answer. The buildings are simply there, as they have been for 4 centuries, attached to a cliff face at an altitude where most construction projects would not begin. The Punakha Valley, lower and warmer than most of Bhutan, grows rice and paddies that have been cultivated for centuries, and contains the Punakha Dzong at the confluence of 2 rivers. a fortress monastery so precisely positioned between its waterways that it appears to float during the monsoon season when the rivers rise around its base. The Dzong has served as the winter capital of Bhutan's religious government for centuries and contains relics of the founding saints of Bhutanese Buddhism in chambers that are still used for daily religious practice. And as the rivers descend from Punakha and the valley opens southward, the road leads toward the final 3 destinations of this journey. Each one revealing a different aspect of what the Himalayas contain that most people never reach. The Nanda Devi Biosphere Reserve in the Indian state of Uttarakhand is one of the most strictly protected wilderness areas in the Himalayas, and one of the least visited. The inner sanctuary surrounding Nanda Devi, at 7,816 meters, the second highest peak in India, has been closed to all visitors since 1982. The closure was imposed because earlier climbing expeditions had introduced pollution, disrupted wildlife, and altered the glacial environment in ways that were still being documented when the decision to close the area was made. In the 4 decades since the closure, the wildlife of the inner sanctuary has recovered significantly. Snow leopards, Himalayan black bears, musk deer, and Baharal, the blue sheep that is one of the snow leopard's primary prey species, have increased in population. Surveys conducted from the sanctuary's boundaries indicate that the absence of human disturbance has allowed the ecosystem to return toward a baseline that predates intensive climbing activity. The reserve surrounding the inner sanctuary remains open to trekkers, but entry requires permits and numbers are strictly controlled. The result is a wilderness that is present in the landscape, visible from multiple viewpoints on the surrounding ridges. But inaccessible in the way that wild places were inaccessible before the era of organized Himalayan tourism. Crosses into India, makes a dramatic horseshoe bend around the eastern end of the Himalayan range. And in doing so, drops more than 3,000 meters in a canyon section of less than 200 kilometers, roughly 125 miles. The gorge reaches depths of nearly 5,000 meters, about 3 miles. Measured from the river surface to the summits of the peaks above it, making it significantly deeper than the Grand Canyon. The canyon is so steep and so remote that a significant waterfall within it was only confirmed by explorers in 1998. A waterfall in a gorge in a mountain range that has been studied for a century and a half. Undiscovered until the final years of the 20th century. The Yarlung Tsangpo Canyon region is one of the most biologically diverse areas in Asia. containing species from both the tropical and temperate zones in a compressed vertical environment that has produced endemic species found nowhere else. Access is extremely limited, and the inner sections of the gorge have been entered by only a small number of expeditions. Most of them facing significant technical and logistical challenges simply in reaching the river. The Siachen Glacier in the Karakoram Range on the northwestern edge of the Himalayan system is the longest glacier outside the polar regions. Stretching approximately 76 kilometers, roughly 47 miles, from its source in the Indira Col at the head of the glacier to its terminus at around 3,500 meters. It is also one of the most militarized environments on Earth. India and Pakistan have both maintained military positions on the glacier since 1984, making it the site of the highest battlefield in human history. With troops stationed at altitudes above 6,000 meters in conditions where frostbite and altitude sickness claim more casualties than direct combat. The environmental cost of this military presence, the fuel, the waste, and the physical disruption to the glacier surface has been documented by researchers and represents one of the more unusual intersections between geopolitical conflict and high-altitude wilderness on the planet. The glacier itself, beneath the military infrastructure it has accumulated, is a place of extraordinary physical scale. Its surface is covered in a moraine of rock debris carried from the surrounding peaks, and the ice beneath this debris is ancient. Compressed over thousands of years from snow that fell on this part of the Karakoram in climates very different from the present. The meltwater from Siachen feeds the Nubra River and eventually the Indus, making it a water source of real significance for communities hundreds of kilometers downstream who have no direct relationship with the conflict being conducted above them. The Himalayas do not reveal themselves to people who are looking for simple things. The range is too large, too vertical, too climatically extreme, and too culturally layered to be understood through any single lens. A person who has trekked to Everest Base Camp has not seen the Himalayas. They have seen one corridor in one country at one season of one part of the range. A person who has visited the temples of the Kathmandu Valley has seen a civilization shaped by the mountains, but has not been in them. A person who has watched the sun rise over Kanchenjunga from a ridge in Sikkim has experienced something real and specific and irreplaceable, but has still only seen one face of a range that has thousands. What the Himalayas offer that no other landscape on Earth offers in quite the same combination is the experience of scale, altitude, geological time, biological diversity, and human cultural depth in a single place. The collision that created these mountains is still happening. The glaciers that feed the rivers of a quarter of humanity are still moving. The cultures that evolved to live at the top of the world are still practicing their traditions. And the wilderness that exists in the most remote sections of the range, the inner gorges, the closed sanctuaries, the glaciers no expedition has fully mapped, is still there. Still operating on its own terms, still largely beyond the reach of the world that surrounds it. That is the last untouched wilderness on Earth. Not untouched because no human has ever been there. Untouched because the scale of what is there exceeds the scale of what humans have managed to change. The mountains have shown you what the top of the world looks like. Now, travel to the other end of the planet, where a different kind of ice is facing a different kind of future. Click now to explore Greenland, the melting giant at the top of the world, and discover what happens when the ice that holds the world's history begins to let go.